I know I say it all the time. I'm excited about our next guest, but I don't know if I've ever been this excited about a guest before. We're going to revisit our old friend about life after death, but that is just the tip of the iceberg. Our next guest not only was featured, he, his wife, and his foundation were featured on the Netflix docuseries Surviving Death, but he also heads the foundation's medium evaluation certification program. You know what that means?
I don't.
It means that he checks out whether a medium is a fraud or not.
Oh.
Yeah.
So this is right up your alley.
This is right. Exactly. My name is Will.
And I'm Karen.
And unlike Mulder and Scully,
we both want to believe.
So we've embarked on a journey of discovery.
We've talked to people deeply entrenched in the spiritual and metaphysical world.
We've thrown ourselves into weird and wonderful experiences. I even joined a coven of witches.
And wait, you joined a coven?
Yep, all in the interest of finding something.
Anything.
That will prove that there's something beyond this physical,
three-dimensional world we all live in.
This is the Skeptic Metaphysicians. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Skeptic Metaphysicians. Welcome to the show, Bob Ginsberg. Bob, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you, Will and Karen. I'm happy to be with you today.
We've got a lot to talk about, but let's set the table first and foremost. I know that you started researching the evidence of the survival of the consciousness very soon after your daughter died in 2002, very tragically.
Well, you know, it's kind of an interesting story for people. The events of that day were that at 3 o'clock in the morning on September 1st, 2002, my wife just shot up in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning and just started shaking and trembling. And I said, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And she said, "Something horrible is going to happen today." And I said, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" And she said, I can't tell you exactly, but something devastating is going to happen today. So, you know, as a parent with 3 children, I did what most parents would do, is I was on guard. You know, I mean, I didn't really believe in premonitions or precognition or any of these things, but we were married a long time, my wife and I, and there were many times together when she would have these things. They were all good things, but every time she'd have one of these visions or feelings, it would always play out exactly the way she said. So logic told me that if she was right then, she could be right now. And I watched over my 3 kids during the day, one of them preparing to go back to college the next day, and my middle child had just started a college career, and my youngest one was working at a part-time job, waiting to go back to high school the next day. And to make a long story short, I let my guard down at night, and 4 of us were at a restaurant. We had 2 cars. I let the 2 kids take one of the cars home, and then we lived in a rural area, and one rode in and one rode out, and my wife and I were like 2 minutes behind them, and we came upon an accident, and it was them. And my daughter didn't survive her injuries, and my son was seriously injured. And eventually, you know, when I came to realize my son was in a coma, he came out of a coma, and when I realized that we weren't going to lose him, you know, as you would expect, I was in a state of shock for a period of time. And then about a month later, I said, "Wait a second." I remembered that morning. I said, how did Phran know? You know, she knew. You couldn't tell me she didn't know. She was shaking and she was trembling, and she knew. As being a left brain thinker, I became obsessed with trying to find out how she knew. And I started traveling across the United States, meeting with medical doctors and scientists and researchers that studied consciousness, because I wanted to find out, A, if there were credible people that had any real evidence for this, and then to answer my own questions, you know, is it possible that she still survived, my daughter still survived in some form? You know, I was where I suspect you might have come from, you know, Will. I mean, I questioned everything. I wasn't a closed-minded skeptic. I was an open-minded skeptic. Fortunately, I think it's important for all of us to be open-minded skeptics.
Very much how I am. That's exactly how I am. I want to believe, so I am open-minded, but I need to see it for real, so I can relate for sure.
How did your wife feel about you traveling around and talking to these experts?
Well, as you know, people grieve very differently, even in the same household. She was more of a spiritual person. She was interested in science, but to her, there was no need, because science wasn't going to tell her what she already knew. I mean, she had this deep inner knowledge, none of which I possessed, you know. So she understood that I needed the science portion of it. And, I mean, we could talk about it, but, eventually you mentioned we formed this foundation for a family foundation and became a global, not-for-profit organization. But I admit that when I started the foundation with my wife, I didn't do it to help people. I mean, that's different now, very different. But I was just looking for a way for me to survive, for me to come to some sort of meaning and purpose and understanding. And eventually, I mean, the evidence that I uncovered just from simple research was compelling, and then it just kept pushing me further and further and further. And I'd say it took about a good 7 years before I relented, and I just sat back and said, wait a second, just if you follow the data and you follow the evidence, at some point you have to accept it, which is something that some scientists never do. And so now I think I'm at the point. I think people go through a period of hope when you talk about the afterlife, they hope there's an afterlife. But what they're really saying is that when they say they believe, they're really saying that they hope. They haven't seen any evidence, and maybe their religion or their teachers taught them that this is the way it is, but they're not quite sure. And some people move from hope to belief, and it's sometimes either from your own investigation and research or from a profound personal experience, you move to that knowing stage. And once you reach that can be very a positive force in your life. You can live your physical life more fully if you believe that we're more than our physical bodies and we're not extinguished when death comes.
So you did found this Forever Family Foundation that really the goal of the foundation is to educate the public about the evidence that's out there that we're more than our physical bodies. So I guess I've got to ask, what kind of evidence have you found? How did you go from hope to knowing?
All right. Well, the first thing, the way I started and the way I think a lot of people start is, in order for life after death to be possible, you have to believe or come to know that our mind, when I say mind, I think you could say consciousness or you could say soul if you prefer, but our mind can act independently of the physical brain. That's how things like telepathy take place, or remote viewing and things of that sort, psychokinesis, distant healing, where our mind confined to our skulls that can go beyond the body. And that's how things like telepathy and ESP work. So there's a tremendous amount of evidence on that. I mean, Dean Radin's research is really compelling, and a lot of the scientists that show that ESP is real. When you go beyond that, that sets the stage for believing to going further. And we talk about near-death experiences and deathbed visions, end-of-life experiences, reincarnation, mediumship, after-death communications. And what I found was, and I dive deep into all these things. And, despite, I mean, I could counter most of the arguments that skeptics will give. And it's easy, I guess, to dismiss any one discipline of research as being coincidence, the product of a dying mind, and so forth. But when you step back and you examine all of the evidence collectively, I think that survival of consciousness is the only thing that makes sense, So, I became a believer based upon the evidence, not based upon, faith or hope.
What part of the evidence or what has been most compelling to you? Like, was there anything that kind of pushed you over the edge?
Yeah, I mean, I was really interested in near-death experiences because, to me, you have somebody that meets every single definition of death. They have no brain waves, they have no respiration, they have no heartbeat, they have no reflexes. Medical science says that they're dead. Due to our increased resuscitative techniques, we bring back a lot of people from death. And what do they describe? Well, they describe many, many things, but certain things are common to most often reported. But the thing that struck me is that they all report clear and lucid thinking. So, if your brain is not working or dying, or, how do you say that it's hallucinatory? Because the hallucination, like people that are oxygen deprived, it's anything but clear and lucid thinking. They have hypoxia, it's fragmented, they're in and out, they're thrashing about. Here they describe clearer thinking that they ever had before. They describe many of them being outside their body and being resuscitated, and then being able to say everything that went on in the operating room. Colors people wearing, the movement, the conversations that went on. Some people report seeing deceased loved ones. They describe this other dimension that they go to. And there's a host of things. Most importantly, when they come back, their lives are changed because they find it very difficult to get reassimilated into the physical world after what they've experienced. But that was the first thing that struck me. I mean, there have been people that have been blind from birth, sightless, and have never seen anything. And yet they have a near-death experience. And then they come back and they talk about the colors and everything that they saw, which turns out to be true. So I think it's good evidence that certainly that our mind is not the same as our physical brain, and that our minds can continue without the brain working. So that was very compelling to me. You talked about mediumship, which we've been kind of tied to the hip with.
And we'll get into that in a second, because that is the second part of this interview that fascinates me completely. But before we head there, Karen, I think you had a question.
No, I was just going to say it makes perfect sense. And it's something you never think about. You never think about that the fact that your brain is dying too, and it's not getting the oxygen and everything that it needs. So how could you have these clear visions? Well, of course.
Yeah, but then
that's proof. There you go.
you see all these documentaries, and you and your wife and the foundation were a part of one, right? Surviving Death on Netflix, which was an incredible documentary. Everyone talks about that, the shared experiences when they come back, and as you see the light and you see the tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel there's a light, and inside the light you have your relatives, right? Your loved ones are there waiting for you to transition you, but something happens and someone says, no, it's not your time. So then you go back into your body, and sometimes you see your body, you rise above, all those things, right? You hear about all that things, and you do hear the counter argument that the chemicals are firing in your brain as you're dying. You alluded to it earlier, is just that explains the visions that you're getting right before you pass. And I do understand taking the bulk of all the evidence together to make the argument for the proof of the afterlife, but there hasn't been, at least that I'm aware of, definitive, this is absolute proof that the consciousness survives.
Yeah, and I don't think there will be, certainly not in my lifetime. I mean, but it reaches a point, what happens in the legal system? You have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and I think we've reached a point where we can show proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but absolute proof, we're not going to know until we die. Here's the bottom line.
And no one ever reports like the slurring or things slowing down, which you would think they would report that too if the brain's dying. But see, to me, since no one's talking about that stuff, it's more proof that they are seeing their actual families.
Yeah, I mean, the argument with near-death experiences, well, they never were really dead, but listen, they're unconscious. A lot of times, their eyes are covered, their ears are plugged, they have no brain waves. It's hard to make an argument that they're still around and observing, it's just not feasible. I mean, there's one famous account of a person that had a very serious operation where they drained all the blood from her body. And she came back and she said that if you go up to I forget the floor, but the 7th floor of the hospital on the east wing, on a ledge outside a window, you'll see 2 sneakers that she saw from her vantage point. And she described the color of the sneakers and how they were positioned. And she told that to a nurse, and the nurse was like, what the hell? I'll go up, and like an idiot. And she figured, and she went up there, and exactly the way she described it, the sneakers on the ledge. So yeah, you can make the argument that somehow she was in a helicopter before, or she went up on the roof and she saw that. But if just, at some point you got to say, okay, that's like beyond reason.
Yeah.
Right. Now you're looking for reasons not to believe more than the other way. Yeah.
There's proof.
Your wife, Phran, sadly passed away probably about a year and a half or so ago.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that must give you quite a lot of comfort, knowing what you know now, that your belief in the afterlife. I'm sure it has helped with that. But has her passing influenced you even further in any way?
Yeah, I mean, despite what you know, and despite the experiences that you've had, I mean, we're human, and then sadness and loss is sadness and loss. And I think the advantage that I might have over some other people is that, in a really dark place, I'm able to reflect back on everything that I know and I've learned to kind of dig myself out. Whereas somebody that didn't believe in life after death might not be able to do that. And I think that's the advantage of like for all our members and all the people that we touch, and is that it just gives them a tool to help. Somebody said we're going to cure grief, run the other way. I mean, that's ridiculous. But, and, we hold these grief retreats, and we're expanding the number that we do. We have them in various parts of the country. Right now we're in California and Florida and Connecticut. We call them grief transformation retreats, but I'm very careful at the beginning in the opening remarks to say, this is not a magic pill. You're not going to walk out of there and grief is going to go away like a virus. But as I said, a lot of them find it is a very transforming, either through the information that they learn or possibly through a very evidential mediumship reading, because we do have certified mediums at these retreats. So I think it's an effective tool, perhaps even more effective than traditional therapy or medication, in the treatment.
And I think there could be an argument made about the fact that grief is a necessary component to honing who we are. I know I've grown the most in my life based on a sense of loss, whether it's loss of self or loss of loved ones or loss of opportunities. It's allowed me to really look deeper into myself and grow from the experience. So I think it would be a devastating thing if we didn't have that along with.
I think you're right. And very often grief or trauma is a catalyst for exploration, because you're searching for answers.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. So sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Have you had any experiences with Phran since she's passed, like through mediums?
And it's interesting because it sounds like Phran had intuitive abilities because she dreamed that something was going to happen, something catastrophic was going to happen that day.
Yeah.
So the veil was thinner for her, from what I'm hearing. So I'm wondering, did that help in any way to maintain a connection? That's an interesting question, Karen.
It's a question that I get asked a lot, because people think, well, you must be getting like a ton of communications and a ton of signs. And what I will say, I haven't gotten a tremendous number of after-death communications, although I'll tell you a couple of things that have happened. But I know Phran, we knew each other very well. And she knows that I'm probably much like you, Will. I question everything. And she is figuring out, because it can't be easy, a foolproof method of contacting me that I couldn't possibly question. So when it comes, it's going to be good. But are you familiar with electronic voice phenomena?
We are. I am. Yes.
All right. So, certain people in spirit, the theory is that they're able to imprint their voice or a voice onto recording devices. And back in the day, these were the reel-to-reel tape recorders. And now everybody uses their cell phone, to record any digital device. So we have a friend. She happens to be a certified medium with our foundation. Her name is Janet Mayer. And Janet, not connected to her work, she likes to experiment with EVP. And she was very friendly with Phran. And she said, is it okay with you? I'd like to set up a series of 7 questions, and I'll change them every week. And once a week, I'll ask Phran in spirit these questions, and let's see what happens. And then she would send me the audio files after they do it. So at one point, one of the questions to Phran was, what is the name of the organization that you started? And you hear faintly but clearly, Forever Family Foundation.
Wow, really? Are you sure? Are you sure they couldn't have been River? And you're just thinking.
That's another discussion, because I'm careful with that. So when I used to get all these EVPs, what I used to do was take it into a group, and I would play it for 10 people. And if one person hears it and 9 don't, I don't think that's very evidential.
Sure.
If I play it and 9 out of 10 or 10 people hear the same thing, it's hard to make the argument that our minds were just forming sense out of nonsense, So here, I was satisfied that it was what they call a Class A example, because it was clear. Last year, this time, she asked the question, do you have a message for Bob? And it happened to be my birthday that day. And you hear, happy birthday.
No, no, you do not. I need to hear these tapes.
So
I need to hear these.
No.
Well, get them together. And you know what? We have, collection of these that we've collected over the years of direct things. So, in my mind, and probably for somebody like you, is that it's very compelling because it's not coming from a third party. We have tangible evidence that we can listen to with our physical sense of hearing. So these things are very compelling if you can eliminate the possibility that fraud was involved and the medium was somehow, or the person collecting it was imprinting it. But, in this case, I know the party involved, and, that's really, not an issue. And I've heard so many. I don't want to give the impression that you just turn it on and it's always going to happen. Some people
Right.
try it for a year or two and never get anything. And sometimes some people are better than others at getting it. I mean, Janet gets it maybe because she's a medium. I don't know, but she seems to get it all the time.
I will say that hearing someone say to me, yes, I'm getting a message from beyond, and the message is this, and hearing it recorded on a device
Right.
outside of someone else telling me does seem a lot more compelling. I will also say I've never heard it. And I have gone on investigations. I've been trying to get to your point. I've gone out and I've never once have heard something said on a digital device.
Sure.
Even we've talked to psychic investigators and witches and all kinds of people who go to haunted places and do the recordings. And they've actually shown or released live videos of this machine that's supposed to be shuffling through all the different radio frequencies, waiting for something, some sort of voice or some sort of message. And every once in a while, as you're watching, you go, I just heard ketchup. I'm like, I didn't hear that. Where'd you hear that? I need to rewind the tape. I didn't hear that. And I just heard a car go by. Oh, I just heard, Joe, you need to go home, right? I've never heard anything.
Okay, but this is the kind of person Will is. So today, today we were in what happened this morning? We're in the kitchen, and you get on your iPhone, you get little memory pictures. This was 5 years ago, whatever. So this picture popped up of my daughter, and we were on a trip to Roanoke. And
Roanoke, Virginia. We're in
Roanoke,
Virginia, so yeah.
And we had bought this picture that we really liked, and it's hanging up on the wall.
In Roanoke.
In Roanoke, yes. And it's an iconic Roanoke symbol. So we have it hanging up. And I look at this picture, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is, remember this with trip to Roanoke? And she's like, yeah. And right then the picture pops off the wall.
Okay.
Nobody was by the wall. Nobody was by the picture. Nothing.
Right.
But that's magic for him.
It depends on the circumstances. Listen, you'll appreciate this. Well, I don't know if you remember, but I gave Netflix a file of Phran had filmed of the lights in our kitchen. I don't know if you recall that. But the circumstances were, we were talking about our deceased daughter. We were out somewhere, and then we came in the house, and then we walked in the kitchen, and then we were treated to this light show. I mean, there were 9 hi-hats in our kitchen, and it looked like the 4th of July, And I had been living in the house for 10 or 15 years, never had that. And so it lasted for about 5 minutes, and then it stopped. And then I walked away, and Francis had come back, and then the show started again, the light show. So the part of the story that you'll appreciate, Will, is that at 9 o'clock the next morning, I had an electrician in.
Absolutely.
9 o'clock the next morning, and I had him take out each one of the 9 hi-hats, to inspect them, and he didn't find anything wrong. So then I had him take off all the control switches, and he never found anything wrong.
Well,
and it never happened, in the 10 years after that. So to me, I'll accept that because first I ruled out the physical explanations and the circumstances we were just talking about her. So I took that as a hello.
In our house, we have hi-hats, and there's one that does flickers all the time.
Right.
I'm just assuming it's a faulty switch, or there's something.
It probably is. Yeah.
Which it probably is. So I didn't really think anything of it. I've watched many documentaries about surviving death and that kind of stuff, and all these stories. And 9 times out of 10, I'm thinking, yeah, but that could be blah blah blah. But we never get the follow through. The fact that you brought an electrician in to find out, that's pretty exciting. That's exactly
okay.
What
So the flickering didn't start until we were talking about someone in our family that passed away. And I said, Will, tell him to stop. And Will says, Keith, stop. And the flickering stopped. I don't know.
I mean,
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
We don't have self-ejecting picture nails, Will. We don't have self-ejecting picture nails.
Well, here's the thing. We know that psychokinesis is real, right? So the mind has a power to affect matter. So it doesn't, because psychokinesis happens, it doesn't mean it has anything to do with life after death. People can control things with their minds, but when it's tied to some discarnate entity in some way, then you start thinking in other terms. I think that the way things happen, people on the other side, so to speak, can arrange these synchronicities and these movement of objects and so forth. It's still psychokinesis because they still have a mind. They just don't have a body because the mind still continues. So, it's the same thing. That's why mediumship is effectively mind-to-mind communication. Just one person doesn't have a body. So it's very, and it's very hard to differentiate for me, which is a problem when I evaluate mediums, is this a piece of psychic information, or is this tied to, a spirit?
Well, that's really interesting because I've not ever heard it described like that, where it's mind to mind communication. And it makes sense that you'd still have a mind. Now, in our physical reality, we see our mind as being our brains. That's our minds. But I believe that there's evidence that has shown that there's so much more than that. Our consciousness does not necessarily live within our brains or within our bodies. It lives somewhere else, and we're just kind of projecting it. We're almost like an avatar, right? We are avatars on this earth, and our consciousness actually lives somewhere else. There's all these talks about that. Don't know if I believe it, but that's what people are saying, right?
Right.
So then let's turn our attention, since we're on the topic of mediums, because you and your wife set up this certification program, which is fascinating to me, because you actually put someone to the test to evaluate whether or not these folks are truly communicating with people or they're just making shit up, right?
Yeah, but I'm saying,
Nice.
I mean, that's pretty much it. And
What do you really mean, Will?
let's say goodnight. But no, you're right. I mean, so I after visiting with a few scientists that study mediumship in university settings, I kind of picked their brains, and I came up with my own way of evaluating mediums. And it's very comprehensive. And, I wrote a book about that, the medium explosion. And the reason I wrote it is for that very reason, because I say in the book, which I stand by, that 85 to 90% of all practicing mediums today cannot do what they claim.
Wow, that high.
I'm not saying they're all fraudulent, although a small percentage are. I'm saying that they have some intuitive ability, as do we all in varying degrees, but they have very little ability to communicate, with the dead, or no ability. So,
Right.
and yet they're out there charging, there are no regulatory bodies when it comes to mediumship. Like tomorrow, or you could hang up Will the Medium sign tomorrow and start charging people $500, and
It's already there.
yeah, I know.
How do you think you got the gear?
But in researching, it's interesting that I found that you thought that perhaps this is actually, to your point, the people who are calling themselves mediums are maybe super highly intuitive and are actually talking to other people's minds and getting information from someone else in an ESP type of way versus speaking to someone that's crossed over. Is that,
Yeah, but then you get the situations where the medium is giving you a reading and they tell you something which you are not aware of, and you dismiss as being wrong, and then later you find out that it's true, but you never knew it. So it's hard to make the argument that the medium is reading your mind if you never knew this, anything about this statement to begin with. Also, sometimes there are these, drop-in communicators, people that you're not expecting to hear from. And then you take down the notes, and then you research it, and you find out, that was real, but you never knew that they existed. So, I mean, there's various ways, to look at that. But yeah, I mean, to your point, if I'm the medium and I say, Will, did you just paint your bedroom blue? I'm seeing a blue bedroom. And let's say you just happened to paint your bedroom blue. That would be a fantastic piece of psychic information, but it has absolutely nothing to do with life after death. It just, you're, as you said, you're picking up the information from in a psychic mind-to-mind communication. But if I'm, bringing through your deceased dad, and I give you 7 pieces of specific evidence, and then I say to you, hey, well, Dad is telling me he likes that you just painted your bedroom blue, then I can accept that as a piece of mediumistic communication, because you've already presented the evidence. It's the same way some of these mediums today, they believe that if they give you messages, then their job is done, and they make you feel better. Your mother loves you. Well, of course your mother loves you, so,
I don't know.
in most cases, so, messages are great, but you can only accept them once the evidence is shown. So you're convinced that there's communication taking place, then a message can be accepted.
Right. So these certification programs that you have, is it like multiple choice, or is it an essay, or how does it work?
There are many steps involved. First, we never solicit any mediums because that would diminish the integrity of the program.
I think they call that entrapment, right?
Yeah. So they find us. We ask them a series of questions looking for some red flags. If those are acceptable, we will give them access to complete an application. And it's not name and address and email. It's 9 pages shit.
Ah.
Okay.
So what are some red flags?
Sometimes when they see the application, if we give access to 10 people to complete the application, maybe one does, because when they see what's involved, and it's not a matter of them sending us $200 and giving them a stamp of approval, they run the other way. The application then comes back, it gets reviewed by a committee, then an interview is arranged, like an hour-long interview, which is very extensive. And if the committee agrees that this is a candidate that should go forward, then we set up the evaluation. And the evaluation, that each medium has to do a series of 5 readings for 5 different sitters being the people that are receiving the readings. And these sitters are all trained by me on how to score information, and we go over examples, and I play the role of the medium, and then after they get the hang of it, we have a pool of trained sitters. So it's comprehensive scoring. It's composite based upon 5 different readings, and there's 5 different scoring methods within that. So it's really, it's not a scientific experiment, even though it is conducted under controlled conditions, but we don't use blinded protocol and have scientific safeguards, because that's not our purpose. Our purpose is to replicate the situation of the medium sitting in front of the sitter.
Sure.
What I can tell you, though, especially during the pandemic, mediums stopped doing readings face-to-face in the physical sense, so what they do is everybody's using Zoom. That opens up the fraud possibility exponentially.
Oh, sure.
Because we caught a medium once that was just like we're doing now. On the left side of the medium screen, she had the person's Zoom screen where she had the person's first name and last name. And on the right side of the screen, she had the sitter's Facebook page open. And she was reading back. It's amazing all the crap you could find on Facebook.
Wow.
She's reading those back, and the sitter is saying, wow, this is the greatest medium that ever lived. She knows everything.
Right.
Totally fraudulent, but this is something that people have to be aware of. 100 years ago, when you were sitting in somebody's house, this wasn't a possibility, but now it is, So you should always give a medium as little information as possible.
So I have 2 questions for you.
Just 2?
Well, no, I have a lot, but 2 that are in my brain right now that I've got to get out before I forget them.
Okay.
So the first one is, can you give us some example of some red flags that you'd see right away and be like, nope?
Well, I mean, one of them is I'll ask that question, what do you think is more important, the evidence or the messages? And some of them will say, well, it's the messages of love that are the most important. I don't like that answer, because the evidence has to precede the message. Or I would say things like, what would you do in a reading where you're not making a connection and no information comes through? Hoping that they would say, well, I would offer to refund, the sitter's money and call it a day, but then they'll say things like, oh, that can't happen. It's never happened. Even the best mediums in the world still have periods where they don't connect. The thing is, the mediums that we've certified over the years are more consistent. They rarely don't connect. They rarely have a bad, reading. So that's the difference. But there's certain things that we ask. I mean, sometimes we'll check their website, and they do everything from pet sitting to art workshops to they'll do 5 million things. I'd rather see somebody be really good at something than do a crappy job with 25 different things,
Right. Sounds like the story of my life. But
So this is a good thing to tell our listeners, if you're going to get a reading, check her out. Ask her these questions. What's more important? My second one before I forget. So what percentage of the people that go through the application actually receive the certification?
Good question.
Since 2005, between 10 and 15% of the mediums that went through the certification gained certification, which means that 85 to 90% don't.
Wow.
Which doesn't make me a very popular person.
No, but it makes your website a very good go-to.
Yeah, absolutely. So then if people really are looking for that authentic medium, do they look for the decal from the Forever Family Foundation on the window, or how do they get certified?
Yeah, I mean, once they gain certification, we list them. Incidentally, no money ever exchanges. They can't pay to participate. They can't pay to be on our website. I mean, money's out of the equation. So we have on our website, on foreverfamilyfoundation.org, we have a certified certified mediums page, and all the mediums are listed. There's a scientific organization called the Windbridge Institute. They're not certifying mediums anymore, but they did, and they have an extensive list of mediums. Other than that, I'd be careful. Everybody seems to be certifying. When we first started doing it, nobody was certifying mediums. Now, mediums are certifying other mediums, which gets
messy.
my radar.
Certification.
Because, then they're also taking classes and paying that medium for the training.
If I train you in this, and I'll be certified by the end of your class. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, or if you do one reading for the owner of the person that's doing certification, that's not really a broad enough base to make a decision. So I'd be wary. There's not you can get a referral from somebody, but just because your friend had a great reading doesn't mean that you're going to make the connection. Think about it. There's 3 parties involved in a reading, or at least 3. There's the person in spirit, there's the medium, and then there's you as the sitter. And there has to be a resonance among the 3 for it to happen. It's a miracle that it happens all together. And yet, 10% of the mediums are extraordinary. I mean, they really can do this on a consistent basis with really obscure information, general stuff. And by the way, when we score things, specific information is weighted more heavily than a general piece of information. So if Karen, if you're giving me a reading and you look at me and you say, "Do you have a great grandmother in spirit?" I'll say, "Well, shit, yeah, she'd be 140." My great grandmother was in spirit, so I'd have to mark that as a hit. But if you said you had my great grandmother Rebecca here, and my great grandmother's name was Rebecca, then I would score that more heavily than the general piece, because I could give you a reading right now and get almost 100% accuracy, but it's all going to be general bullshit.
Right.
Your site is a fantastic resource for people who are really looking. They can go to your site and they can look at the directory of certified mediums, and those are the type of people that you can reach out to them and then get a reading and get hopefully the comfort that you're looking for. And we'll put a direct link to your site on our show notes, so you can just go to skepticmetaphysician.com and click the episode link, and in there on the show notes you'll have the direct link, so that it makes it easy for you to find.
And I would say this is especially a great resource for people who have recently lost someone, because you are in that grief. And unfortunately, there are people that would take advantage of that. So you don't want to, spend all this money with just someone off the street that feels like she knows the person that passed. So really check out this website and these mediums. That's a great resource.
I would also say that there's such a thing as bibliotherapy. I mean, you can find some comfort in reading, about these things, and we have recommended reading things, and learn about all these things we're talking about and form your own opinion. Just absorb it and see what you make sense out of.
Truly a fantastic resource. And Bob, I could talk to you all night, because I know that I had a list of questions that I think we only got through 2 or 3. I think I still have another 40 or 50.
I'm sorry, I didn't shut up.
No, not at all. I'm so glad you brought a lot of information. When you have sometimes you have these conversations that you look at the clock and you go, how the hell has it been 40 minutes? That's how this has been for me. So I really, really appreciate you coming on the show. If someone wanted to reach out to you, obviously we'll put the link to your website out there. Is that the best way for someone to reach out to you?
Yeah, at foreverfamilyfoundation.org. If somebody wants to email me, they can email me directly at robert@foreverfamilyfoundation.org.
We'll add that link directly to the show as well. Bob, again, thank you so much. This has been fascinating, and thank you for what you do, because it's a service that we all desperately need. And thank you for bringing your skeptic convictions along with you. I really appreciate that.
You're so excited, Will. I can tell someone like me now.
Yes.
Finally found somebody that looked like you. Yeah.
So again, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah. And before we go, I wanted to share a brand new review that came on our podcast. It's from, the name of the person is Riaz, RIAZ 4112. They're in the United States, and they rated us, Karen, 5 stars.
Woohoo.
And their subject line was "my favorite podcast." So that's a great start. Right?
Absolutely.
And they go on to say, "I love listening to this podcast, have been listening for months. They have interesting topics. Great work, Will and Karen."
Awesome.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
That's our new favorite person right now,
Yes.
besides Bob. Now, if you'd like to leave us a review or rate the show, and we really, really would love it if you did, you can do that directly on our website, skepticmetaphysician.com, or on any of the podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And As you can see, it doesn't need to be a long, rambling dissertation. Just a couple of words will do just fine. And we do appreciate every single one of our reviews and are always looking for ways to improve the show. Reviews and ratings are only one way that we can evolve and grow by learning what you like and what you don't. So please take a minute and review the show if you'd be so kind. And I want to thank you for coming along on our journey of discovery with us again. We'd love to continue our conversation with you on Facebook and Instagram. So please find us there under @Skeptic Metaphysician or at skepticmetaphysician.com, where you can find direct links not only to our social media platforms and those of our guests, but where you can also subscribe to the show or leave us a review or voicemail directly on the site. This week, we'd love to know what you like the most about the podcast. So drop us a note. You might just hear your email or your voice right here on the show. And as always, if you know someone that would benefit from hearing the messages that we've shared on this show or any of our others, I hope you'll consider sharing us with that person. It'll help grow the show and may just help someone else come to terms with the fact that we're so much more than just this three-dimensional body that we inhabit. If you're listening to this episode on the radio and missed it, not to worry. All of our shows, including this one, can be found on our site, skepticmetaphysician.com. I hope, Karen, that you've enjoyed this episode as much as I have.
This has just been wonderful.
It really has. And audience member, I hope that you have enjoyed it as well. Sadly, that's all we have for now. And I do have to say sadly because I'm lamenting the fact that the interview is over. I really loved our conversation. But hey, we'll be back again next week with another super interesting guest. We'll see you on the next episode of The Skeptic Metaphysicians. Until then, take care.